Good morning. The next topic in disaster management is psychological and social dimensions in disasters. Okay, this is one common question in this subject, and they ask about psychological and social dimensions of disaster as a 10-mark question, or it can come as psychological dimensions in 5 mark or social dimensions in 5 mark. Okay, so it's a very important topic, so I hope you will study well, because I think this is a sure question in your final exam. So let's go on into the subject matter. The impact of disaster on the psychology social aspect of a person is very huge. Okay, whether it is the mind or the social aspects, both are affected by disaster. Okay, any person who goes through a disaster is mentally affected. They are psychologically depressed, they become anxious. How do you feel when you go through the coronavirus? Okay, see, maybe as youngsters you may not have that much fear, but what about the old people? Because the news channels say that older people are likely to die more. Okay, so a lot of people are scared, and they are wondering whether they will survive the uh, disease. Okay, so that is psychologically being affected. I remember once, my one of my friends had gone to tsunami relief camp. Okay, so that time when a huge wave came after the tsunami, that is many days after the tsunami, when a wave came, the children who were in that area became very scared, because it was a normal wave, but it was only a little bigger than the other waves, because they thought that it is another tsunami. So this is the reason why the psychology of a person can get affected, or the mind of a person can get affected because of a disaster. Same way the social aspects, their whole lifestyle is disrupted because of the disaster. So these are the ways in which psychological and social aspects of a person's life get affected. Okay, so it affects not only the individual. See, society is made of individuals. In your first year you decide what society is, what individual is. So first the individual is affected, the family is affected, and the community as a whole is affected during any disaster. So some of the factors on which the extent, how much of the psychology can be affected, or how much of the society can be affected, there are certain factors on which it depends. The origin of the disaster. Suppose it is a natural disaster, then people cannot blame each other. People can only blame God. Okay, so that is a different way of blaming. But if it is a man-made disaster, then people will start blaming each other. They will blame the government. They will find out who is responsible for the disaster. They will also feel that they have been betrayed by the fellow beings. They will lose hope on the government if the government has caused a disaster. Okay, so the origin of the disaster is very important. For example, 2 days back there was a blast in Lebanon. Okay, there directly some people were responsible because they stored highly explosive material near the city, and many people, thousands of people got injured and hundreds died. So that is directly somebody in the government or in the executive is to be blamed. Okay, so origin of disaster plays a role in the psychology dimensions. Okay, the next thing is the degree of personal impact. See, if you are not directly impacted, but somebody you know of is impacted, then you will not feel so much loss. But at the same time, if your family member is affected, if they get an injury, then you will feel very upset. But if somebody dies, that will be much more deeper impact. Okay, so all these things, the extent or the degree of impact that a person has, that plays a role in the amount of psychological or social impact. Then the size and scope of the disaster. See, some disasters happen where only 100 people may be affected. Some disasters where 1,000 people may be affected. Some disasters like tsunami where lakhs and lakhs of people were affected. In fact, many lakhs of people died, so that many lakhs of families got affected. So the size of the disaster plays a major role in the amount of psychological problems and social problems in the society. So if many lakhs of people are affected, then so many people have psychological problems, so many people have social problems, they don't have houses, they don't have anything. So all that has to be taken care of. So the size and scope of the disaster plays a role in the amount of or extent of psychological and social problems. Then the probability of recurrence. See, if you know that something like a tsunami will never come again, then you will be happy. But if you know that tsunami is going to come again and again at regular intervals, then you will be very much affected. You will want to leave that place. You want to save whatever you have. You want to protect your family. You want to protect your belongings. So things like hurricane, that is a storm, cyclone, or even a flood, they can come again and again unless the cause is removed. For example, if you have a cyclone, you have to have mangrove forests to prevent the impact of cyclone. Even then, you don't know where the cyclone will hit. If it is a flood, you can prevent it by building pathways for the water, excess pathways to run off. But even then, there are times when you cannot control the forces of nature. So if you know that a disaster is going to happen again, then you will be more affected, you will be more anxious, and you will be in the middle of the night, you may suddenly wake up thinking that a tsunami is coming or a cyclone or a flood is coming. So like that, the recurrence probability plays a role in the psychological or social affliction of people. Then the characteristics of survivors. See, every disaster there are survivors. There may be people who are affected, but there may be people who have survived the disaster. So these people will have certain experiences. They may become more religious, or they may become more cynical. Okay, they have different kinds of behavior. So that plays a role in the psychology and social aspects of their own family's life and the people around them. It changes their personality also. Okay, so now we'll come to the core psychological impact. Okay, how does the psychology get affected? So main thing is there are certain physical things that can happen. People who are affected psychologically, they can have fatigue, they may have gastrointestinal upset. Okay, they may have cognitive problems such as confusion, emotional problems such as anxiety, depression, grief, behavioral problems such as sleep and appetite changes. Okay, and they may also involve in substance abuse because of the psychological being affected psychologically. Okay, so these are some physical problems, cognitive problems, behavioral problems, and emotional problems that people go through after psychologically being affected because of a disaster. So let's see each of these reactions. Okay, common stress reactions after a disaster. There are emotional reactions. Emotions mean how you behave. Okay, there is fear of the disaster coming again, grief because of the loss, anger either at God or at the government or people who caused the disaster to happen. Then a feeling of guilt. See, most people feel a guilt because they are not able to save somebody else. They survived and others died. So that guilt is there. Then they'll feel depressed or sad because of being affected. Okay, and then they'll feel despair or hopelessness, that they are not able to control anything, that they have no hope because the forces of nature are so great. Okay, then the other thing is they have resentment means they are not happy with others. Then a feeling of helplessness, which is same as hopelessness. Emotional numbness. Okay, they are emotionally drained, they have no feelings, they are so tired and without any feelings. Okay, same feeling of being overwhelmed. Okay, these are all emotional reactions. Then there are cognitive reactions. I hope you have studied all this in your psychology classes earlier. So trouble remembering things. Okay, they keep forgetting. These are all cognitive reactions. Then they have confusion. They are not able to make decisions. They are preoccupied with the disaster. They keep remembering only the disaster. Then they have nightmares. During sleep, they suddenly wake up thinking of the disaster and they are not able to sleep. Then spiritual beliefs are questioned. So they think that there is no God because God only created the disaster, or they feel that if God was there, he wouldn't have created the disaster. So these are different kinds of reactions. Then the children who are affected may have less attention span, they have memory problems, they blame themselves for what disaster happened. Okay, these are all cognitive reactions. Then the physical reactions, they have interpersonal problems, fatigue, restlessness, sleep disturbances, body pain, increase or decrease in appetite, hypertension, that is increased blood pressure, heart pounding, that is their adrenaline is increased. Then they have nausea, vomiting sensation. Suddenly they will be startled. That means suddenly they feel fear. Then they have headaches. These are all physical changes in the body which can happen after the disaster has occurred. And each of this is related to some psychological problem. Okay. Then other than that, interpersonal relations, what will happen is they will not trust people. They will be irritable when others come and talk. They will have sleep problems. People who are affected by disasters start crying easily. They have conflicts with family members. They withdraw themselves from other people. They feel rejected and abandoned by others. They are judgmental. So these are some of the interpersonal problems or reactions that occur in people who have gone through disasters. So let us see age wise how people are affected because of disaster. So we have seen the cognitive reactions, physical reactions, emotional reactions. So let us see which age goes through what kind of problem. See, first we are looking at children. Children, they are fearful of new situations. They have separation anxiety. That is, they are scared that they will be separated from their parents or known people. Then the fear of darkness or animals, clinging to parents. If you see some children, they will be just holding on tight to their parents because they are scared. Then they will talk more. Then that is called baby talk. Then they have loss of bladder or bowel control. They have constipation. These are gastrointestinal problems that can occur. Then they have speech difficulties, which example stammering. They have loss of appetite. Then they become passive and quiet. Thumb sucking is one sign of psychologically being affected. Irritability, aggressive behavior at home or school, competition with other siblings for attention, that is attention seeking behavior, night terrors, fear of darkness, avoiding school, withdrawal from classmates and other friends, loss of interest in anything that they do, poor concentration and attention in school, headaches. They will keep complaining of headaches, and when you take them to the doctor, they will not find any physical problem. So this is all psychological fear. Then they will also have fear about the weather. They will have fear of their safety. Then the recurrence of the disaster, and these are some of the common things that psychological problems that children go through. Okay. Same way in adolescent, they will have similar things like sleep disturbance, appetite disturbance. One thing that adolescents can do is they can have rebellious behavior. They will have problems in the school like fighting, attention seeking. They also can have various psychosomatic problems, physical problems like headaches, vague pains, things like that. And poor performance in school, withdrawal from other people. So these kind of behavior, and they can also get involved in alcohol and drugs. Okay, this is the reaction of adolescent people to disasters. Then we'll see in older people, adults and older adults, they have guilt, hopelessness. So it's a different set of problems that they face. They have depression, withdrawal. See, children are scared and they cling to the parents. But what can adults do? Adults will be frightened, but they will not show their they'll show their fear through anger, depression, irritability. So these are mood swings, hopelessness, despair, guilt. So these are some of the conditions that adults go through. And very old people, like older adults, they will also have sleep and appetite disturbances, memory loss. They will have sudden decrease in the health of their body. Okay, they can have illnesses which can get worsened. When people go through a lot of stress, the illnesses that they have, it can flare up like cancer or any systemic problems. It can increase in severity, that is worsening of the chronic illnesses. If they are already undergoing arthritic pain, then the pain can become worse. So these are some of the common problems of older people. Okay, and usually after a disaster they have to get money or help from the government, so they'll feel embarrassed that they are not able to earn their own money and they have to live on other people's money. So these are some of the common reactions of older adults. So we can conclude by saying that emotions and reactions that follow a disaster are normal. Okay, so all these things which we have discussed, these are all normal reactions. Okay, they may be abnormal from anybody else who has not gone through disaster, but after going through a disaster or suffering in a disaster, these are all normal reactions of a person. So how can you overcome all these reactions is by providing adequate psychological counseling support to the people who are affected by disasters. That is why as soon as any place has a disaster, there is a lot of psychologists who are sent to that area so that they can talk to the people and provide them psychological support and also give some medicines to help them overcome all these psychological problems. So this is very important for us, and every disaster has these psychological dimensions, and adequate psychological counseling and support is necessary to help the people to overcome all these physical, emotional, cognitive and other problems. Okay, so we'll go to the socio-demographic impacts or the social impact. One of the common aspects after a disaster is the loss of house. See, in Lebanon, where the bomb blast took place, almost 1 lakh people have lost their homes. Even during tsunami, we see that a lot of people lost their homes because they had to go away. During tsunami, the houses were washed away, and hundreds and lakhs and thousands of people had no homes. They had to be given built homes which were rebuilt, or low cost houses were built for the people affected by tsunami all over the world, especially in the areas that were affected. So loss of house is one of the most common and the first thing that happens. See, even during a flood, the house gets damaged, so all this muck or the silt or the wastewater sediments, they all enter the house. All the things inside the house is damaged. So what happens is people are taken out of their homes and they are kept in temporary shelters. So what are these temporary shelters? Places where thousands of people are made to stay. Even during cyclones, people are forcibly taken from their homes and made to stay in these places. Okay, usually Kalyana Mandapam or a gym or a church or a temple auditorium, they are used as places where these, or even schools which are on higher ground, they are places where these people are made to stay. And so that is a that is a social problem. They are removed from their homes, and that itself causes them to feel psychologically depressed. So the social aspects and psychological aspects are very closely related. Okay, then the next thing that happens is the loss of income. Any person who is affected by a disaster, they lose their income, they are not able to work, their business is gone, so they are affected economically. This when they are not able to earn money, they have poor quality of life. See, every disaster causes people to get affected and lose their income. Just imagine fishermen after the tsunami. What happened? They were fearful of going into the sea, and there were a lot of dead bodies in the sea, and the fish had new, I mean, the if you read the literature, you will see that the lifestyle or the environmental impact was so great that they could not catch any fish after the tsunami. Same way, after a cyclone or a flood, you will see that a lot of people's belongings were damaged and they are not able to do their business, they are not able to work. So these kind of problems are very common in every disaster, so that causes people to have poor quality of life. Then the next social aspect is the displacement. Every disaster again causes displacement. People have to move. Just like we talked about the housing, the loss of housing causes displacement. Okay, even during this coronavirus, a lot of people had to leave their homes where they have been working for many years and go back to their hometowns. Okay, they had to leave, like all the city became less populated because people went to their native places. So that causes displacement. We had a lot of people walking on the highways because of the coronavirus. Every disaster causes displacement, and that causes a disruption in the life of the people. Then the next thing happens is environmental destruction. See, a forest fire, when it happens, all the people who live on hunting, honey gathering, firewood gathering, all their lives get disrupted. They are not able to do their work, or they are not able to make a living. Same way, as I said, after the tsunami, the fishermen could not do fishing properly for many months. So this is the environmental destruction which has a direct role to play in their lifestyle and their income. Finally, the education gets affected. Any disaster, the schools may get damaged in a cyclone or in a flood. The school can get damaged. So if the school is damaged, there will not be any possibility to hold classes in a proper classroom. The children may have to have open air classroom, and that too after the situation returns to normal. Sometimes the school may not be damaged, but the children may be affected so much by a disaster that they do not feel like going to school. We saw in the psychological aspects, one of the common things in adolescent and young children is that they don't want to go to school, withdrawal symptoms. They are not cooperating in school. So it's a common problem that children, after going through a disaster, they do not want to go to school. So that causes poor education, and this disruption in their school life also causes their whole life to go waste. So they are not able to have a good education. They'll have poor quality of life. So these are the ways in which the society gets affected, and the social impacts of a disaster are too high, and it leads to various social issues and social problems. So these are the psychological and social dimensions of any disaster. Okay, so I hope you understood this. Study this question very well and the answer to this question, so that you'll be able to answer properly in your exam. The last topic in this chapter, okay, is trauma and stress. So let us see what trauma is. So trauma means undergoing a traumatic event, undergoing a stressful event like a disaster. Okay, what is trauma? An accident is called as a trauma. Okay, like for example, a car accident is a trauma, violence within the family, outside the family, or a shooting, all this are trauma. Okay, even if you fall down because of any running fast, we call that a traumatic event. Okay, so similarly, when there are natural disasters like hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, these are traumatic events which causes people to go through suffering, either directly or indirectly. Okay, even watching about a disaster on the television can cause indirect trauma to the people. You see, there are notices on television before they show an image saying that it could be traumatic for some people, because when you see death or blood, some people get traumatized. Okay, so all this is trauma. So how does this trauma affect a person? See, after you go through this trauma of disaster, okay, you may have intense fear, helplessness, hopelessness, and you will have less coping skills at times, or you feel sometimes that you are not able to have any coping skills because of that's the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. So trauma can cause all these feelings. Okay, some people have loss of memory. They forget things that happened before, or things that happened during the traumatic event like a disaster, and they do not want to talk about the traumatic event. Okay, so these are some of the common problems. See, any physical or psychological problem that occurs after a disaster are traumatic stress events. Okay, all your feelings that you feel, you may have depression, psychologically being affected, sleep difficulties, then intense memories, sad or depression, anger, helplessness, headaches, stomachache, dizziness, so numbness. Okay, all these aspects are traumatic events. They are also called as post traumatic stress disorders. Okay, sometimes the people want to be with close family and friends all the time. Some people may overeat, they eat a lot because they are stressed. Some people may not eat at all, they have memory problems, they forget things, then they are not able to concentrate. Okay, a good student who was studying very well could suddenly have loss of concentration and not study well. Okay, so these are some of the common problems that people undergo when they are traumatized, when they are undergoing a disaster, or when they have gone through a disaster, they have all these feelings. Next is stress. What is stress? There are different kinds of stress. One is acute stress and the chronic stress. Acute stress is during the immediate or the instant when there is a disaster, how you feel. Okay, so what happens is there is a physiological reaction calling hyper arousal. Okay, hyper means more, arousal means being aroused, a feeling of being aroused. So this is also called as the fight, flight or freeze response. Okay, remember this very carefully. It is fight, flight or freeze. See, when you corner somebody, then they'll start fighting. Till then they'll be running. When they have no other way to run, they'll suddenly turn and start fighting. Okay, so that is a fight. When you have no way to escape the tsunami, you will try to fight it by going against the waves. That is fight. Okay, when you think that you are cornered, then you will fight. Or the other way you will try to escape the disaster is by running. That is flight. Flight means running away. Or some people, how they react is they freeze, they just stop, they don't know what to do, they are just completely lost, their mind doesn't work. So that is the freeze response. So whenever people go through sudden stress because of a disaster, they have one of these responses. They either fight the disaster, or they run away from the disaster, or they will freeze and not be able to do anything when the disaster happens. Okay, so it depends on each person's situation at that particular moment, and each stressful event causes a disequilibrium. That is, equilibrium means normal state, disequilibrium means the normal state is affected, and they will be affected biologically and psychologically, and this is the acute stress response. Okay, so how do you know that you are have crossed that acute stress stage? You will have pounding heart, that is, your heart will start beating faster, you will be shaking and trembling. Just imagine you just escaped suddenly when a bus was about to hit you and you just saved yourself. You will be trembling and shaking, okay, because you were so scared. Then you will start sweating, you will have shortness of breath, some people vomit, some people will have lightheadedness, that is dizziness, and difficulty in thinking and concentrating, because you will always keep thinking of the disaster which happened or was about to happen. And you can have other body symptoms like headache, feeling tired. These kind of symptoms can happen. So these are all signs of acute stress. But there are times when chronic stress, that is, after the disaster has happened, even after many months or years, sometimes you have the same stressful response because you keep remembering the disaster. So some people have chronic stress response. Other people, after the acute stress is over, they'll forget the things. But chronic stress, where the traumatic situation is prolonged, so your body will have psychological, physiological problems for a long time. So you may have this feeling of being on high alert. That is, for example, if a tsunami has happened, so the whole village will not be able to sleep in the night because they'll be thinking each wave can be a tsunami. You see, tsunami may come only once in 50 years, but the people will not be able to cope with that. They will keep thinking that the next tsunami is going to come. Same way, people who have been caught in earthquakes, they keep staying outside their house and do not go indoors, and they have tents and put tents and stay there for many weeks because they are scared that the event will recur. There will be another episode of the same disaster. So this kind of response happens because of chronic stress at times. And they will have interpersonal relationship. The people will be on high alert for a repetition, or they will have interpersonal relationships, anxiety for a long time, depression, sleep disturbances, appetite disturbances, social problems. Okay, so one of the common problems that we see is PTSD, or post traumatic stress disorder. The other thing is the acute stress disorder. Okay, post traumatic stress disorder, the feelings will be this chronic stress response. Okay, people will feel nausea, people will have headache, they will have pounding heart, they will be on high alert, they will be anxious, depressed, they will have mood disturbances, sleep disturbances, appetite disturbances. Okay, all these behavior are signs of post traumatic stress disorder. So this is a very important topic, post traumatic stress disorder. So you when you're asked about post traumatic stress disorder, you can write about the acute stress and the chronic stress stage that people go through following a trauma or a disaster. Okay, so even an accident can cause post traumatic stress disorder. It need not be a disaster. Okay, post traumatic stress disorder is common in many people when they have undergone a stressful situation. So they feel whatever psychological and physical disturbances or abnormalities they face after the stressful event, which could be a disaster or accident or anything. It is called as post traumatic stress disorder. So they will have anxiety disorders, mood disorders, autoimmune disease flare up, chronic conditions can get worsened, cardiovascular problems can be there, they can have mood disturbances, sleep disturbances, food disturbances, that is they overeat or undereat. So all these are effects of trauma, and they can be effects of post traumatic stress disorder. Okay, I hope you understood the social and psychological dimensions of disaster and about stress and trauma. Okay, so with this we have finished this chapter. The next chapter is public health and disaster management, which we will see in the next class. Thank you.